Katherine Gypson for Insight. In November 2008, Taliban militants kidnapped New York Times reporter David Rohde and held him captive for more than 7 months. Back in New York City, his new wife Kristen anxiously worked with the New York Times and the FBI to secure his release. In their new book, A Rope and a Prayer, David and Kristen take turns telling their incredible story of faith, courage, and perseverance. David, Kristen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
David, in November 2008, you were in Afghanistan reporting the final stages of a book on that war. Can you take us through the decision to interview a Taliban commander for that book?
I had spent 2 weeks in southern Afghanistan, actually in Helmand province, and I've been surprised at how popular the Taliban had become. And it made me really feel that I needed a Taliban kind of character in this book. I needed to sort of get their side of the story, how they had had this resurgence. And I heard about this Taliban commander who had done interviews with 2 other foreign journalists. I was told he was a moderate. I met with a journalist who had met with him twice, and she was European. She said, "You're American, it's more dangerous for you, but I don't think he'll kidnap you." And unfortunately, we went to the interview and it was a trap.
Do you have an instinct for how far you can push your limits?
I thought I did, but obviously this was a mistake. When we drove to the interview, his men sort of blocked the road with a car. 2 gunmen ran it towards our car when we stopped. They ordered the driver out to get in the back seat with me, and they ordered the Afghan journalist into the back seat with me also. And then the gunman jumped in the car and just drove off down the road, one behind the wheel, one pointing his weapon at us. And a second car had been waiting also, and that was like a chase car that followed us. And that was the beginning of 7 months in captivity.
And then what happened?
They held us, the interview was just about an hour outside of Kabul, the Afghan capital. And then they moved us in the next week or so into Pakistan. It was very clear that the Taliban feared an American military raid if they held us in Afghanistan to try to rescue us. So they moved us over the border into Pakistan, and we saw there that there was basically this Taliban mini-state where the Taliban really don't feel much threat from the Pakistani military, and they run North Waziristan as the area. It's really their fiefdom. They control everything there.
I found it interesting that you maintained a strategy of telling your captors the truth. Do you believe this kept you alive, and what are some of the strategies you employed?
I think it would have been a mistake to not identify myself as a journalist, to not say I'd worked for the New York Times. I tried to, the things they could find online I talked about. People think of the Taliban as sort of living in caves. They don't. They're very sophisticated. They Googled me and my family and were able to find out a lot of information about me. And one thing, and it was funny, this was a mistake, I talked about reporting I had done years ago in Bosnia. When I was an employee of the Christian Science Monitor, I helped expose the mass executions of 8,000 Bosnian Muslims around the town of Srebrenica. I told my captors this thinking they would see me as an independent journalist who defended Muslims. And instead, their response was, "Well, that just means you're worth more money."
Kristen, I'm wondering, where were you when you first heard the news, and how did you feel?
I was shocked, actually. I had married a war correspondent, so I knew there was always a certain level of risk. And he actually hadn't been back to Afghanistan in well over half a year, so I think maybe the assessment of that risk was different if he'd been going regularly. I was upset initially that he hadn't told me about the interview or consulted me on it, but I very quickly put that aside and really just tried to make my way through what to do next. It was like having my worst fear come true.
I think one of the more interesting elements of the book are your attempts to understand Pashtun culture and to use that understanding to relate to your husband's kidnappers. Can you talk about some of the approaches you used?
I tried to get a message to David's captors through a mullah that supposedly was close to the Haqqani family. I sent in a Pashto plea. David had a translator friend who had moved to America to go to college, and he helped me write out a plea. I asked him, what would a Pashtun woman do? And he had written out a plea that said, my husband is my veil, meaning he's my honor. You've taken him away from me. Please return him to me. Give me back my honor. So I did that. At one point, much later in the captivity, I think month 6, the mullah got back to us and said, you know, David's captors have sent you several video communications. I think they would like to have a video from you. And again, it was a plea just asking that they release him, that we settle this quickly, and that it was a family matter. And please contact the family. Yeah.
During the negotiation process, you were allowed to talk to David on the phone. What did you feel when you were speaking to him?
I really felt it was important. The only thing I could do was to stay calm and sound calm on the phone for David. I didn't know if it would be the last time we would speak. And if that was the case, I wanted him to know that I was okay, that I loved him, and that I could handle whatever was going to happen.
She was great on the phone. I mean, her voice did sound incredibly calm, and she really, reassured me. There wasn't any, sense of panic, and it just, made me stronger because of the fact that she was so strong.
You had some surreal moments with your captors. Stands out when you taught them Frank Sinatra and Bruce Springsteen songs, as well as had some in-depth discussions about American concepts of justice and the free press. Do you think that these discussions humanized you in their eyes? And do you think that it changed their views of Westerners in any way?
It's hard for me to know. I think some of them it did. I thought there was some shift among some of the guards, but other guards were just very suspicious. They, live in this alternate reality I read about in the book, where they really see this as a religious war. They believe that the United States is there and that American troops are forcibly converting Afghan Muslims to Christianity, and that this is really a religious war, that there's this sort of vast Christian, Jewish, Hindu conspiracy against Islam, and they're simply defending their country and their faith from this unjustified attack.
Moving several months forward in your captivity, you eventually decided that you needed to escape. Can you take us through that decision, and why did you choose that particular moment to escape?
We had a meeting with our kidnapper. He would sort of disappear and then come back. He didn't really stay with us much. And he had declared in this last meeting that that President Obama had gone to Saudi Arabia in the spring of 2009 to talk about my case with the King of Saudi Arabia and nothing else. And this was another example of their sort of delusional thinking. And I just became increasingly determined to try to escape. I wanted them to get nothing. And then separately, we were moved to a new house in this town of Miran Shah in North Waziristan. And it was very close to the Pakistani military base in town. And what we had seen was that the Pakistani military never came off their base. They never challenged the Taliban control of the town. And we decided this was our best chance to try to escape. And what we did was we snuck out at night while our guards were asleep. I had found a car tow rope on a shelf with some motor oil and some wrenches, and we used it to lower ourselves down this wall. And it was literally maybe 2-3 of a mile, a walk to the Pakistani military base. We were very lucky. The guards there nearly shot us. They thought we were suicide bombers sort of lurking in the darkness. We were allowed on the base, and this young, very moderate and very brave Pakistani Army captain let me call home. And then Kristen did an amazing job of getting us flown out from that military base.
Kristen, where were you when you got that phone call?
I got a call on my cell phone. We live in New York City, so I was walking. My mother called me on the cell phone and said, David's escaped. Come home right away. He's on the Tochi Scout base. So she had all this information he'd given her. So I ran home. I called the newspaper as well. An editor from the paper came over to the apartment. My mother had written everything on sticky notes, so they were strewn across the apartment, but she got everything correct. Immediately we got on the phones. I called Richard Holbrooke. Between the four of us, we called Richard Holbrooke, Hillary Clinton, and Patterson, and we were able to have them contact officials in Pakistan and say, we know David Rohde is on this base in Pakistan. Please make sure he's exited from the country. But I can tell you, I found out at 7:30 at night, and we were up all night long making these calls and didn't sleep at all. My fear was that, the helicopter would be shot down. So it was a very tense night. Elation, but not, I really didn't feel safe until he was out of the region.
I'd like to touch on one of the more interesting elements of the book, and that is how religion has shaped the conflict in this region and how it changed for both of you throughout this process. And if you could talk a little bit about that, Kristen?
As time progressed and I found it harder to find my own words, I'm a big believer in the power of intention. I actually kind of went back to some of the prayers I learned as a child. And I also tried to find a way to feel connected to David. We'd only been married 2 months. At our wedding, we had readings from many different religions and whatnot. One of the hymns was the St. Francis prayer. And so I said that actually every night, and kind of looked at our wedding photo. And that kept me centered, and it gave me a way to surrender in a certain sense without completely giving up, to just sort of remain focused and positive and have some sort of, I guess, a routine too. Yeah.
I'm frankly more of a skeptic about religion. I was kidnapped by religious extremists in Afghanistan. When I was covering the war in Bosnia, it was Christian extremists who were executing innocent Muslims. And I'm not, a very religious person myself. I found that praying, I sort of made up a set of prayers and would say them each day. It gave me something to do to pass the time. And, I don't know if, there was some great, God that heard my prayers and would reach down and kind of calm me down when I would say them, or if it's just, prayer is a psychological trick. But if, a friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer or facing some kind of crisis, I would say, prayer can be a tool to kind of help you get through a situation where you really have no control. But I remain, very skeptical about religion. I've seen it used for extreme purposes, and terrible things, have been carried out in the name of religion. The people who kidnapped me, it's the Taliban faction known as the Haqqani Network. They described themselves as this sort of pious movement that was sort of defending, their nation. To me, they really acted as criminals. I mean, it was about money. It was about getting prisoners released. It was trying to, make a name for themselves among other jihadis. And I really don't feel that my kidnappers are representative of Afghans or Pakistanis or Muslims in any way.
I'm wondering, how are you both moving forward from this experience? What's next for you?
We actually are hoping that the book, will resonate with people, anyone who's in a situation of uncertainty or making tough decisions for a spouse. And we hope as well that it will be a chapter in our lives and not define our lives completely.
My days as a war correspondent are over. I am, back working at the New York Times, but I'm working as an investigative reporter. Mm-hmm. I just feel that my wife and family have been through enough, so I'm still committed to journalism, but I won't be doing it in conflict zones anymore.
Mm-hmm. David, Kristen, thank you so much for your time today and for coming in to speak with me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.